Hey there. Welcome to another episode of The Imperfect Prophet with me, your host, Wonder Wendy. What a weekend I've had. What a week I've had. What a year I've had. I don't know. Do you ever feel that way? Is life ever going to slow down? But by the same token, I don't really want life to slow down. I'm enjoying the ride. But every so often, I do need to take a break, rest, recharge, rehydrate. I've got my water. Do you have your beverage for our conversation today? Because we all say it's more convivial if we're sharing food and drink, or food or drink, or just a drink. And a drink doesn't have to be an alcoholic beverage. It can be water, it can be juice, it can be whatever you want it to be. It's just that communion of sharing together that makes things different. That's why communion, for those of you that are churched, is a sharing of bread and water or wine or grape juice or whatever it is. I've often said, I think if Jesus were alive today, he might share a bag of Doritos and a bottle of Pepsi. Either way, you're sharing, you are in communion with other people. And that's what it's about. It's about bonding together. Last week, I talked about history and what we learned from history. And I talked about it in terms of not being afraid because we know we've survived before and will survive again. In the week since I recorded that episode, I've been reminded that it's Women's History Month. And a lot of things in women's history help us remember how far we've come, and then also how far we still have to go and what we have to do to get there. So I want to share some of those insights with you. As a matter of fact, this morning I walked out to the driveway to pick up the newspaper. One of the headlines was Title IX bar opens soon. And it's a bar that's going to only play women's sports on the televisions. That's something incredibly different. We've never seen that before. And for those of you who don't know what Title IX is, go look it up. Go learn. Because it used to be that women's sports really were mostly ignored in schools and in other environments. Title IX legislated a mandate that schools and such change that. Now, was it a perfect practice Title IX in place? Definitely not. But just a couple months ago, I met this woman who was in college about the time I was born, or just a little before I was born. So she's my elder. And it turned out she'd been an athlete all through school and then became a phys ed instructor and worked in the school systems and helped women's sports. I suddenly looked at her, I said, wait, you know what happened. You are living history. You can tell us what sports were like before Title IX and what impact Title IX had on women's sports. And it started a whole conversation. Now, the other women in the room were a mix of women. Some were my age, and others were her peers, all living together in a retirement community. Very quickly, we were discussing the evolution of women's rights as actually lived in their lives. If you think women don't have any rights today, if you think we've lost all of our rights, if you think that we've got nowhere, go talk to these women and realize the battles that have been fought over for them, the last 50 years, 60 years, but really over the last 150 years. If you go back to the first Seneca meeting, I know I'm going ancient history here, in the 1800s. And that's back when Elizabeth Cady Stanton and all those wonderful women got together and first discussed an Equal Rights Amendment. And they discussed women's suffrage, which is the women's right to vote, which we didn't have until well into the 1900s. If we discuss all of those things, you realize how far we've come and how far we haven't come. Because guess what? There is still no Equal Rights Amendment. There is nothing constitutionally that guarantees women rights equal to those of men. I know, hard to believe. Here we are 150 years later, and it still hasn't happened. I need a drink of water. Actually, maybe I need something stiffer, but I'm going to yoga later. I found alcohol and yoga do not mix. That's a side message to the wise. So 150 years since that first meeting in Seneca, roughly, and we still don't have an Equal Rights Amendment. But by the 1920s, we had the right that gave women the right to vote. So very interestingly, that's how it works. My grandmother was amongst the first women who, at a young age, were able to vote. I know my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was born in 1900. Very nice, neat marking of 125 years ago. talking about what women go through or what their rights are. Grandma was considered a spinster because she was over 20, had a post-secondary education. She'd gone to normal school to be certified as a teacher and still wasn't married in her early 20s. And we're not even talking like 24, 25. We're talking 21. Women had very few options open to them 100 years ago. 100 years ago, you get married, maybe you become a nurse, maybe you become a teacher if you can't find a man who wants you. Eek, those were your realities. Women at that time, the laws largely regarded us as sidecars to men. So many things we legally could not do. And things have slowly evolved, slowly changed. Is there still room for growth? Oh, yes, there is. But you need to understand the history so you see how far we've come and appreciate what yet has to be done. So Grandma gets her teaching certificate. She did get married. By the time she was 24, she'd had my mother. She was no longer teaching. But my grandmother remained very proud of education, and she'd married a minister who was also well educated. And she, for the first years, homeschooled my mom to the extent that my mother did finally go to public school. But in public school, she graduated at the age of 16. And shortly after her 17th birthday, started college. Again, not a traditional route for women in that point in history. There were already sororities, so there were other women, there were peers, but it still wasn't a presumed thing that you would go to college. Now, as luck would have it, the year my mom went to college was 1941. So by the end of her freshman year, on December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor was bombed. The world changed. The world changed, and for our modern generation, as precipitously as when we shut down for COVID. Everybody was affected. Nobody was safe. Nobody knew what to expect. This was huge. World War I had largely taken place for Americans overseas. And we had soldiers going over to fight in that war. And we sang patriotic songs and we bought war bonds. But it was way over there. We weren't afraid. Now this war had entered our airspace. Now this war was very present. And here was my mom, a 17-year-old freshman in college. And she'd met a really cool guy. At least I think she thought he was really cool because they kept dating, who turned out to be my dad. And like so many of his peers, he ended up going to fight in World War II. It wasn't immediate, though, because he needed his training and he was able to keep being in training and go through officers training school. A whole lot of things happened. In addition to that time, my mom went to visit him down at his training camp in Virginia. And mom and grandmother thought the appropriate thing to do was to pack a wedding dress for her. So guess what my mom ended up doing? Getting married on December 30th, 1941. 43, sorry. 41 was the war. 43 was when my parents got married. So all this is evolving. All this is happening. Now, until World War II, if a woman got married, her college career was done. She became a wife and probably expected to become a mother as well. But this was not normal times. They didn't have much time together before Dad was going to ship out. Apparently, they made good use of that time because by the time Dad shipped out, Mom was pregnant with my eldest brother, who was born an appropriate 11 months after the wedding, just in case you're doing math. So here's my mom, very pregnant, with her husband departing for World War II. A whole lot of unknowns because a lot of guys weren't coming home. My dad did come home. Obviously, I'm here. But my eldest brother was 16 months old when he met him for the first time. Dad was gone. Mom decided to go back to school. Why not? She'd worked on the family farm a little bit. She'd worked in an aircraft plant with my grandmother, who'd moved herself and her husband down to Connecticut to work in an aircraft manufacturing plant. A lot of women were doing unprecedented things during World War II. You've heard of Rosie the Riveter. I don't know if Grandma was riveting, but she was building aircraft. Yeah. And my mom decided she needed to go back to school. Now remember, married women didn't go back to college, especially not with a baby. And here's a surprise. My mom's sorority, which would never in the past have allowed a woman to come back with a baby, did. And my brother had all these aunties that helped my mom. My mom was able to go to class. She was able to study because she had sorority sisters who didn't have dating lives because most of the men were gone to the war. There were a few guys who did not qualify for service that were still home, but it was a pretty sparse dating scene. So they helped care for baby David, and life was good. And she was able to finish her college degree. That was a wonderful thing. Dad came back from the war, and her life was pretty traditional from that point on. She would end up having 5 more children for a total of 6 of us, me being the caboose. Now, my next up sister, the number 5 child, is 10 years older than me. And when she went to kindergarten, my mom actually felt a little bit lonely. All this house full of kids, they all go to school all day long. So she put that teaching degree to use. She went back, got a teaching certificate. Actually, she put her college degree to use and went back and got a teaching certificate and started teaching middle school French. And many people in the Burlington area remember my mother as a French teacher because of the few years that she taught French. Now, I say a few years because when she got pregnant with me, and let's just put some context on this. This was a woman in her early 40s, had been married for more than 20 years, had 5 children. She and my father were active in the church, active in the community. My father's a university professor. She is a middle school teacher. She was asked to resign her position. Want to know why? Because she was not an appropriate role model for middle school girls because she was pregnant. I still don't understand that one. It still upsets me. And if it doesn't upset you, give it some thought. And so my mom left her teaching position involuntarily, and she had no legal recourse. There is a letter to the editor that she wrote decrying this injustice, which to the best of my knowledge never got a response and was never dealt with. It's a very sad thing. Now, not for me, because I had a mom who decided she didn't need to go back to that teaching environment. She enjoyed raising pretty much an only child because all the other kids were so much older. And she'd been so busy in the young years with those other kids, she didn't get to just enjoy. So she enjoyed being my mother. And before you ask, my French is miserable, but I have a pretty decent French accent. That's my best phrase. I speak a little bit of French. So my mom, educated, empowered, but also more or less a traditional housewife. Now, the next generation started to shake things up a little bit. My eldest sister decided when attending the University of Vermont, she wanted to have a degree that was not necessarily traditional for women. So she enrolled in the engineering program, and she is a civil engineer. When she graduated in 1972, she had one female classmate in the engineering program, were the first 2 women to graduate from the University of Vermont's engineering program. Think about that. Less than 60 years ago, first 2 women to graduate from the University of Vermont's engineering program. They were trailblazers, whether they know it or not. And now the University of Vermont has a women in engineering program and club that supports the women in that, but she didn't have that. And a lot of our female trailblazers were just like her. They wanted to do something different. They didn't want to fit into the norm of being a teacher or a nurse. Maybe they wanted to be the doctor. Maybe they wanted to be the president of the college, or engineers, or scientists. Women wanted to have more choices, but they didn't have great role models at that point in time. There are role models now. Maybe not as much as you'd like to have, but there are still role models, and that's a fabulous thing. When she got her degree, it wasn't easy. A lot of firms didn't want to hire a woman. They had double standards. She wore the power suit that was so popular in the 70s, which is a little bit scary if you look at it in today's modern context, and dealt with a lot of sexism. There were workplaces in the 1970s that didn't allow women to wear pants. I know for certain that in the House of Representatives and Senate in the state of Vermont, it was the 80s when women were finally allowed to wear pants in session. My aunt was a legislator. Actually, 2 of my aunts were legislators. And they complained because it was cold in that room. There were drafts on the floor, and here they are in dresses and skirts with their legs freezing and being told that pants are not allowed. Another friend of mine who is closer to 70 started a job doing essentially physical therapy, some different terminology, but she was doing that. And it was in a hospital. And at that time, all of the nurses wore those cute little white dresses with a little white starch cap, and all that was going on. And she said to her employer, if you expect me to teach dance and movement to these people as physical therapy, do not expect me to be wearing a cute little dress. So they told her she could wear pants, but it had to be a coordinated suit. So she went out and got those lovely polyester suits that had stretchy waists and stretchy legs and allowed her to look appropriate but still wear pants and do the work she needed to do. Within 6 months, the hospital had a revolution because the nurses said, if she gets to wear pants, I get to wear pants. And things started to change at a rapid pace. So we have people like my friend Joe to thank for changing the basic necessities. You have to wear a dress. Talk about limitations. She couldn't actually do her job well when wearing a dress. So thank goodness she spoke up for herself and made a change for a lot of people. So my sister made it in engineering. Now I'm a lot younger than she is. And my first jobs were not the greatest jobs. In the 80s, the tail end of the baby boom, which technically I am not part of, I'm just a little too young to be a boomer, was taking all the jobs. Even low-paying jobs, there weren't a lot of them available. So I laugh whenever I see these kids today who are like, I need a job, but I'd like an internship where I get to work in an office and I'd like to type, or can I just work from home? No, you were lucky to get a job at a fast food restaurant wearing a nasty polyester uniform, which, by the way, those have gone. I'm also jealous of that. And making $2.50 an hour. $2.50 an hour was pretty good. That said, one of the jobs I had was working at a truck rental firm that might have an orange logo, but that's another discussion. Don't want to get libeled or slandered or anything because I never took this to court because I didn't know I could. So I was working there in the summer. The desk was hot. There was no air conditioning. It was sticky. It was dusty. The uniform regulations said I could wear shorts, I could wear a skirt. I did not wear Daisy Dukes. I did not over-sexualize the uniform shirt, which was a lovely tan color. And yet, I had one of the drivers who would constantly come into the office. Can I get a kiss? Can I get a kiss? He thought he was cute. Now, I honestly don't know how old that man was, but to me, at the tender age of 19, he was ancient and creepy. And I kept saying no, and I'd move away from him. I would say no, and I'd move away from it. One day he was so aggressive that I ended up standing in a corner, literally nose in a corner with my back to him saying no. And he still surrounded me. Not too much later, the boss decided to reorganize the business because I was a distraction. I lost my job because that guy was handsy. He was an asshole. And I'm still angry to this day. And a few years later, our world exploded when Anita Hill made an allegation of sexual harassment in the Senate. If you don't know who Anita Hill is, please go look her up because that is a vital part of women's history. That you understand that was the first step towards the Me Too movement so many years later. Anita Hill said that should not be allowed. She said it loudly. She said it proudly. And she took her life into her hands doing so because she was the one who was criticized, just like I was the one who was eliminated for being a distraction. And when Anita Hill did her thing, I realized I should have had legal recourse as well. But I didn't at the time when it happened. And that company goes on, and I have survived and I've moved on. But I never want another woman to feel like that again. I never want another woman to stand there thinking, what do? I need the money. I have no rights. And I have men telling me I'm cute, so I deserve it. Yeah, I've heard that before. You deserved it. You were dressed for it. So that happened. And it happened to me again in 2004, 5, early 2000s. Talking to a gentleman who was from corporate headquarters. I wanted him to hear my plans, my ideas for the company, what I was doing. It was important to me to be heard. So I was paying attention to him so he would hear my ideas. Not sure at what point his ideas shifted so drastically, but suddenly his hand was down the back of my pants. I don't know how that's appropriate. And I did bring him up on charges. And it was embarrassing for everybody involved, but it needed to be done. I didn't do it immediately. I thought I could walk away. I thought I could hide. But then I had some PTSD as a direct result because I hadn't dealt with it. And I was so angry. I had so much anger. So for you women who have joined us in the Me Too movement, for you women who appreciate that there's still no equal rights amendment, for all of us who are frustrated that Roe v. Wade was turned over, know that if you do not change the laws, because Roe v. Wade was a decision based on the laws of the land, and the Supreme Court decided that Roe v. Wade was not good policy. The laws didn't support it. Instead of resting on that judgment, that Roe v. Wade judgment, We should have been changing the laws for the last 50 years, but we didn't do it. So don't get angry at the Supreme Court. Don't get angry at the Senate. Don't get angry at the White House. Get angry at yourself and get motivated. Start organizing other women who agree with you. Oh, and not just women. Look for men who agree with you too, because guess what? They do exist. And some of them just need to be taught. They don't appreciate. They're like, you've got all this stuff now. It's all legal now. You've got jobs. You've had women running for president. We haven't had a female president, but one of these days we'll get the best candidate out there and we'll get the winner. Right now, we're not getting the best candidates at all. Maybe it's time for you to run. Maybe it's time to be motivated enough to be the one who makes the change. Is there somebody out there listening today who is questioning their abilities to be whatever they want to be? If you are, stop it. Become motivated. You can get angry, but don't just get angry. And don't just spout on the internet. Make change. Whenever you complain about something, look for a way to make it real. Look for a way to change the laws that are causing what happened to happen. You can do it. I have faith in you. So until next week, living a life full of wonder sounds like an amusement park, doesn't it? But it's not. Sometimes you have to work at it. And I want us all to have a life full of wonder. So last week, I challenged you to study your history. And this week, I'm going to challenge you to do it again. Go out and talk to somebody who's 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, depending on how old you are, years older than you are, and ask them questions about their first job. What was it like to be a woman in the workplace? What challenges did women face? What did their mothers do? What did they learn from their mothers? What did they not learn from their mothers that they wish they'd known? And become informed. I'm so excited that we had a chance to talk today. And I'm actually having a better day because we talked today. I hope you are too. Until next week, have a wonderful week.